But in your life, will do what you must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you.
Hello everybody and welcome to Women's Spaces. My name is Elaine Holtz and I'm your host. And as always, I'm very excited about today's show. I have with me a special guest by the name of Kathleen Berry, who is an activist and an author. And we're going to cover a very interesting topic today. We're going to be talking about Abolishing Prostitution Now, which is a global alliance of women across the globe, actually, for the abolishment of prostitution. And I know it's going to be a very lively conversation. And you know, it's a very sensitive issue too, so just prepare yourself to hear some things that, you know, are going to give you some thoughts to start thinking about some of the things that are happening to women, particularly young women across the globe. But before we get into the conversation, I want to say once again, happy birthday. We had celebrated Martin Luther King birthday on Sunday. There was a wonderful rally at the Santa Rosa High School, and the women and children that were there, it was just so exciting to see all these different people there celebrating Dr. King's birthday and also listening to some of these fabulous speeches that these high school students presented. And one of the things that I came away with is remembering his statement, "The day your life ends is the day you become silent about things that matter." Well, as most of you know, I have pretty much stuck to my original goal of Women's Spaces, and that is having only women on. We've had two men through the whole experience. I've been on now for 5 years, and I'm really happy to announce that I'm going to continue that, even though people put a lot of pressure on me to interview males. I'm not going to do that. And today's subject is going to prove how important it is that we have a program that focuses on women's issues and some of the problems that they're having, not only at the home front here, but across the globe. But before, I want to flash a picture here because I was honored. As you know, on the Monday, the 20th, was actually the day that we celebrate Dr. King's birthday, but they had a rally as well as a work day, and I was honored to be asked by Reverend Turner of the Community Baptist Church to come on down and read my poem, "I Am Women, I Am All Women." And I was so excited because I was able to get 3 women to read with me. I divided the poem into 5 pages. The font was, believe it or not, 24. It was just amazing. It was so big, but I had the 5 pages. I got 3 women in the middle to read, and I read the first part and the last part. But what was so exciting to me is that the 3 women that read with me is one woman was an African American woman, another a Latino woman, and another a young Caucasian woman. So we definitely had a variety of I am women, I am all women. So I'm going to flash the picture here. Here I am, a day on, not a day off. That means that all the people that participated. And there I am wearing my white suit, I call it, because as you know, I've been involved with the Andy Lopez Coalition and have started a group called Mothers in White. So I represented the Mothers in White, and if you can see in the background, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's the 3 women that read with me, and then also there is Dr. Turner, Reverend Turner's wife, saying a day on, not a day off, which was very exciting to me that people contributed so much time to our local nonprofits. So lots to think about. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you know, one of the things that came to me so clear during this whole celebration was, you know, you can kill the man, but you cannot kill the dream. And he had a dream, and I have the same dream, that we all come together and live in peace and harmony. And it's going to happen, but we have to work at it. It's not a simple process. It takes work. It takes commitment from each and every one of us. And I encourage you, make a commitment to peace. Make a commitment to your community. Well, that's a lot to think about, but you know, Women's Spaces, that's what it's all about. We got to start thinking. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, Kathleen Berry. Kathleen, welcome to Women's Spaces once again.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm delighted to be back with you.
Well, I am always so happy to see you. And you know, I'm so impressed. I mean, every time I look at your resume, I just go, wow, what a woman. So let me tell my viewers just a little bit about you. Kathleen Berry has not one doctorate, but 2 doctorates, one in sociology and one in education. And among many, many things, she's written 2 very, very important books. One of the books that we're going to talk about today is called Prostitution of Sexuality, Global Exploration of Women. And then, of course, the first one that I interviewed you on was Unmaking War, Remaking Men, which is just one of the most fascinating books I've ever read. And then when I read her bio, it's very interesting. About in 1995, in France, of all places, the Marie Claire magazine named her as one of the 100 women who most changed the world for women. So it's just an absolute honor to have you at Women's Spaces.
Thank you so much, Elaine.
Does it bother you? You know, I always, when people introduce me, I always go, is that really me? It's amazing. Well, tell us just a little bit about yourself. I know we're going to talk today about your book, Prostitution of Sexuality, Global I can never pronounce exploration. It's exploitation of women. And we're going to talk about that. Can you give us a little background of what inspired you? What made you write that book? I mean, it's just a very, very interesting topic.
You know, I come out of the 1960s feminist movement, the women's liberation movement, and really what we call radical feminism that emerged at that time. And what we were doing in the movement at that time was taking on the issues that most deeply affected women, that other feminists were too embarrassed to take on, such as women's right to control their own bodies through the right to abortion, such as exposing the huge crime of rape. This was a time when the word rape was something we were all too embarrassed to use in public discourse. Even saying the word. And so we said it loud and clear, and we started really exposing that. While I was working on that issue, I happened to see an article, very tiny article in the newspaper, about a gang that had trafficked women from one country to another. And I thought, oh my God, I thought rape murder was like the worst thing that could happen to women. I knew nothing about trafficking. This would be in around 1970, 69 or 70. And so I just started collecting these articles whenever I saw them. There were little, small pieces in the paper that nobody paid much attention to. Pretty soon I had a file and was asked to write an article for a feminist anthology and to do something on trafficking, because I was the only one who was bringing it up at that point. The first thing I discovered was that trafficking is actually a euphemism for prostitution. Now, let me give you a parallel here. When we talk about drug trafficking, we assume that that is bad because of what the drugs do to the human beings, particularly young people who take them. With prostitution, there's been this assumption that it's really bad to traffic women into prostitution, like it's bad to traffic drugs from Colombia to the United States, but we don't mention prostitution at all. And what I realized was that the real crime that's going on here is not just the trafficking. That's just the route for getting the women into prostitution. The prostitution itself is really the crime against women.
Well, you know, that's interesting that you say that, because there's been kind of a movement, particularly in this country, to legalize it. You know, to try to give it, they call it, and I know there's one of the things that I was reading in the information that you gave me, that they're called sex workers here in the United States, but you are opposed to that because there's a bigger and a broader meaning. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we have legalized prostitution in Nevada, So that makes the state of Nevada, and in fact the governor of Nevada, the chief pimp for that state, because Nevada has organized prostitution and organized and legalized the places where women can be put for men to go and buy them. The state of Nevada is providing a customer service for men to buy women. That would be the same thing that would happen in California. It is the same thing that has happened in Germany. That's about the only thing that's true about what has been said about legalized prostitution. All the rest of it is fiction created by the sex industries, which unfortunately many legislators and governors are willing to buy and accept, such as that it will control disease. Well, you have a health check once a month. What if the day after your health check you contract STDs? Sexually transmitted diseases? Then it's just spreading until the next month. It's absurd, but somehow we believe these things that we know when our government tells us kind of crazy, idiotic things about what it's doing about the crash of our economy. We go, do you think we're really that stupid? But we haven't been doing that about prostitution. We haven't been looking into these myths that the sex industry actually creates, just like the advertisers create for other things, and get us to believe so that it's going to be okay. Another one is that the women are protected because, you know, they're locked into these brothels, and therefore they're protected, which is totally antithetical to what prostitution is itself. Because prostitution is men buying women and children, or children, to use in whatever way they want. Whether that means urinating in their faces, or slapping them around the room, or whatever that is what the customer buys. And that's what the brothels in Nevada and in Germany, and if we get it in California, the governor of California will then be the chief pimp of this state that provides that kind of service to the men of California. This does nothing for the women.
Oh, it's, you know, when you really get into it, you start recognizing, first of all, what a vulnerable position women are in. Because working in this type of atmosphere, you're very, very vulnerable. People, like you said, the people buy, they can do anything that they want to, which is, it's really kind of sad when you think about it. And then some of the mythology, that was interesting that you said they're tested once a month, but they could get something the next day, and then it could be a whole nother month. So that in itself is really not a safety, it's really not a prevention, because you have 30 days where lots of different things could happen. Well, let's talk a little bit about this, how you started working. You get this awareness, you write these 2 books, and then all of a sudden, here you are now organizing and working with this group called, Abolish Prostitution Now. How did you get involved with that? What is the goal of that, and how did you personally get involved with it?
Let me go back to the late 90s when I had worked with UNESCO to try to develop new international law where the United Nations would recognize that prostitution is a violation of human rights. So we drafted a new law that hasn't been adopted yet. And I took it to the United Nations, to the Human Rights Commission, with others that I was working with, and presented it there. And I was beginning to launch a global campaign on this. Now, of course, when you do something that radical, to propose that the whole world has to treat prostitution as a violation of the human rights of the person being bought, you're not going to be exactly welcomed with open arms by a large number of people. So it was extremely controversial. It was very radical. And what everybody told me including the people I work most closely with, this will never happen. At that point, I had to withdraw from my work. This was the late 1990s. I had to withdraw from all of my work and retire. I was a professor, I'm a sociologist, I was a professor at Penn State University, and I had to retire for health reasons. So in the meantime, I begin to see from my kind of quiet place of, my home and being retired, I'm following everything that's happening in the world. And all of a sudden, the issue of trafficking takes off. And all of a sudden, there's organizations all over the world against trafficking for prostitution. And I got so angry. Because of course trafficking is a horrible thing, but it's also illegal. Even in the United Nations, trafficking has been illegal since 1949 in the Convention Against Trafficking in Human Beings for Prostitution. Almost every country in the world has laws against trafficking. We need to implement those laws more frequently. But it was this huge effort on the part of people all over the world to not see what was actually happening in prostitution, and more importantly, to not use the word prostitution.
Oh, so what you're saying is that they were not putting the connection together. They were making trafficking like it was maybe sending them into clean homes or something, not integrating it with the idea of the sexual activity.
Well, it was assumed that
Right.
it was into prostitution, but it wasn't being said. It was like it was back in the 60s when we didn't use the word rape. It was kind of too embarrassing, and then feminists came along and said, stop rape now. And so what's happened is we've had these huge movements develop against trafficking without looking at what is actually going on. What is the experience for a woman when a man buys her to use her for prostitution? And in the last 5 to 10 years, we have been hearing from the survivors, from the women who have been bought and used and gotten out and gotten angry and are having their say about what their experience is. And it's what I was writing about when I wrote Female Sexual Slavery, which was published in '79. I started working on this issue in 1975. But most importantly, it's firsthand personal experience from one woman after another of what happens when she gets in the car, when they go into the motel room, when he comes into the room in the brothel, wherever it takes place. There's an excellent book by an Irish feminist who was in prostitution for 7 years called Paid For, My Journey Through Prostitution. And it's one of the first books that actually gives you that story, word by word, line by line, act by act, what it's like and what is actually happening. What is it that men are buying? Why are they going to prostitutes to do this? This has been the biggest secret in the whole feminist movement for decades and for centuries, really.
Well, it's interesting to bring that point up because most people have the illusion that it's only men who do not have a partner or a wife, or that they're lonely, or they need someone to talk to. Are you saying that's the myth of it all?
Not only am I saying that, the women who have been in prostitution are the ones who are really making this very clear and saying that virtually all of their customers are married. Virtually all the men that they serviced and were paid to service go home to their wives afterwards, or to their partners, or to their girlfriends, but this is something that they're doing on the side, in addition, in secret. And that's, of course, why it's been kept so secret. Why we don't use the word prostitution. Because we're going to be outing millions and millions of men who are out there very quietly buying. And in the state of Nevada, they're doing it with the support of the state. And in Germany, it's the same thing. It would be the same thing in California, where the state says, let us help you buy women in the easiest and most effective and most secret way. Because the bodyguards that are around these places in Nevada, I've been to these brothels and doing my research, the bodyguards are not there to protect the women. They're there to make sure that the men get in and get out without being exposed, without anything, so that the business keeps rolling.
Well, you know, Kathleen, oftentimes people say that women that engage in this oftentimes are doing it by choice, that they made a choice to be there. I'm not talking about maybe somebody that has been is trafficked in, and you know, that to me is a whole different issue. But you hear that a lot. You hear, well, women choose, and that's why you have to set up the protection. How do you overcome that aspect?
You know, one issue that you and I know both, you and I both know as feminists very well, is the issue of wife abuse. When a woman is being abused by her husband in her home, she will tell you that he loves her, that she's happy in her marriage, that he didn't mean to do this, that it's never going to happen again, that it only happened once. And we don't believe her, because we know that when men start abusing their wives in marriage, they don't just do it once. She isn't happy. She's having to put on a front to do that. It's the same thing with prostitution. But more importantly than the issue of consent of women is the issue of consent of men. That by focusing on whether or not women consent to prostitution, we stop looking at the fact that some man gets out of work or leaves his home or leaves his children at the birthday party and goes out and decides to, that is, he consents to buy a woman that he can sexually abuse and physically abuse in any way he chooses for the amount of time that he has her. That's the choice in prostitution that we are going to eliminate through Abolish Prostitution now, with all of the survivors on this planet who are coming out and saying, this is what they do to me. This is what, they come to urinate on my face.
Oh my goodness! You know, there's a letter when you sent when we first got the information. There was this open letter of the survivors, and it was really, really interesting, because what they're saying is how vulnerable they are, how unprotected they feel, and that oftentimes it's difficult to get out, which I find very, very interesting. Well, let's go into a little bit about some of the models. I know that you've been working pretty hard trying to set this thing up, but also you mentioned I generally ask my guests to give me 5 questions, and one of the questions that we were talking about here is the Nordic model that has been adopted in Sweden. Now, I know this, for me, when I think of the United States, I almost think we're like 50 years behind everybody else.
We are.
So what is this Nordic model? And it's I guess when you gave me the information, you said it's adopted in Sweden, Iceland, Norway, and several other countries, as I hear, is in the final stages of even becoming law, I guess it is, or this model in Ireland and France. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The Nordic model is called that simply because Sweden and Norway were the first countries. Sweden was the first country to adopt it. And it comes right from exactly what I've been talking about, for the last several minutes. It comes from the recognition that men are the problem, and that until we get to the root of the problem, that is men buying women, we're not going to do anything to alleviate the horrors that women go through in prostitution. So Sweden, more than 10 years ago, adopted a law working with feminists in the country based on some of the work that I've been talking about here and our efforts to do this at the United Nations, to create a law that says prostitution is a violation of human rights, which would mean then that anybody who bought a woman for prostitution would be violating her human rights. If you take that from the international to the state level, then you say, as Sweden has done, and they've put this under their Violence Against Women Act in Sweden, that anyone who buys someone for prostitution is a criminal for the act of buying, and is subject to both a prison sentence and a very stiff fine. Within 10 years, prostitution in Sweden has cut in half, and the trafficking into Sweden is virtually non-existent, because it's not a good market for the traffickers to bring women to put them into prostitution, because the customers are getting arrested there. Norway adopted the model. They have had the same success. In Sweden and Norway right now, over 70% of the people support this law, not because Swedes and Norwegians are different than we are, but because they have a law that they see is humanitarian, is just, is fair. And with these laws, it's not just arresting the customers, but the state is also obliged to develop programs and services to help women get out. Women in prostitution suffer severely from drug abuse, from really serious health problems, but they have probably more, I've worked on the issue of war and combat veterans. These are the people with post-traumatic stress disorder when they get out. They are traumatized in one purchase after another.
Well, as you're telling the story, all of a sudden I'm just thinking of this woman. I mean, imagine day in and day out, I never thought of it quite this way.
5 times a day, 20 times a day.
I know, it's really interesting. And also, by seeing that enacting these laws, cutting back on the trafficking, definitely indicate that there is a correlation between women going into prostitution
right.
and the trafficking issue. I mean, that's kind of making a statement there. Would you say that's true or not?
Oh yeah, that it's very obvious then that trafficking is for prostitution, and that when you break down the prostitution, arrest the customers, there's no place for the traffickers to get successful business. Now, the really good news, because we've been talking about a very painful subject, but I want to tell you the really good news, first of all, is that women are getting out. They are speaking about their experiences. They are literally recovering from their trauma. And they are becoming the strongest champions of these laws. And so I've joined with them, as others have, to work with them to make these laws universal. And we are on our way. As you mentioned, it's not only these several countries that have already adopted the law. Of all places in the world, France, one of the most sexualized cultures in the world, is in the final stages of adopting this as state law. Ireland is in the final stages of adopting this as state law, where anyone who tries to buy a woman will be arrested, severely fined, and the women will be provided, if they want it, with support services that will take care of their health, the psychological and counseling support, job training, and re-education in that area. But here's my really good news, because this just came out yesterday. There is, in the European Union, which involves all of the countries in Europe except Great Britain and one or two others, but it's a union of all the countries in Europe. The Women's Lobby of the European Union has just endorsed this law, and it has just gone through committee of the European Union, and next month it will come up for a vote for the entire European Union, which means that then every country in Europe would be expected to adopt this law. So the people who told me, I'm so happy to say that the people who told me 25 and 30 years ago, this will never happen. Somebody just told me that actually a couple of weeks ago when I was explaining this. Oh, you are dreaming. This will never happen. And it's happening, and it's moving. It's going on. I mean,
What do you think is changing? I mean, why all of a sudden, I mean, there's a lot of focus going on now in the trafficking, but not on this aspect of it. But what do you think is changing the hearts and the minds of the countries that are doing this, and what is stopping our country from adopting something like this?
The sex work lobby is stopping our country. At best, Americans are liberal. At worst, they're fanatical right-wing
But wait a minute.
woman-hating.
There's a sex workers lobby in the United States?
There's a sex work lobby all over the world.
Really?
That's what we call them. They lobby legislators. They go in and sit on their laps, and the men, of course, probably offer favors. I don't have actual proof of that. But because they say, nobody can stop me from doing this because I consent to it, it's my choice, then most Americans sit back and say, oh, we wouldn't want to stop anybody who's consenting from doing anything that they would consent to. Well, in fact, that's wrong. We stop people who are abusing themselves with drugs from consenting to drug abuse. And I'm talking about hard, cruel drugs. I'm not talking about the lighter stuff. We care about our people enough to intervene when what they are doing is hurting themselves. We try to stop people from committing suicide. We have somebody dedicated solely to the Golden Gate Bridge to talk people down from committing suicide. But it was their choice to commit suicide. So choice is really, you don't get to legitimately choose things that will hurt yourself, things that will be harmful to you. So it's a false argument. But I also liken it to kind of the 1% argument, the one, not 1%ers, but the 1%ers in this country. We have an Occupy movement, and we refer to the 98 or the 99% who are left holding all of the debt and all the consequences of the debt, while the 1% walks off because they have made it and they have the right to walk away with all this money. Those percentages are comparable to what's going on in prostitution. The women who are campaigning to say that it is their choice, one, are doing it at behest of the sex industry. They're not doing it as sole individual, gee, I love doing this and I just set it up in my apartment and I'm having a ball doing this. They're doing it at the behest of the sex industry. But they are also making up 1% of the women in prostitution. So we're conceding again to the 1%, like we have been trying to ask people not to concede to the 1% who economically rule us.
That's a very, very interesting point. I mean, when you start to think about it. Listen, we're going to go on a little bit more, Kathleen, but I have to identify us right now.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Elaine Holtz, and you're listening to Women's Spaces. I'm honored to have with me today a very special guest by the name of Kathleen Berry, and you see I'm just flashing her name. We're going to identify ourselves. And this is Women's Spaces here at Public Access Television, and the topic we're talking about is a very, very sensitive topic, and also a very enlightening topic. I can't believe how much I'm learning about this and how many myths I have in my own mind about this that are kind of being, little by little, are being unraveled and kind of taken away. We're talking about Abolish Prostitution now, and we're also talking about there is an alliance for women to abolish prostitution across the globe, actually. We've covered several subjects about different models, ones that are been adopted in Sweden, Iceland, and Norway, and Kathleen said very, very soon France is adopting legislation that's going to stop, to kind of stop prostitution. So right now we're going to do a little bit of a wrap up, talking a little bit more about what her future goals are around this and other things that she's excited about. And I'm going to get her to talk a little bit about her book, Unmaking War, Remaking Men, which I think actually blends into the conversation we're having. So go ahead and continue with your thought, Kathleen, what you were just saying.
I'm not sure where we left
We
off.
were talking about the fact that the choice, that this whole mythology around choice.
Let's just drop the word out, because it doesn't have anything to do with prostitution unless you want to talk about the customers. Unless you want to talk about, as I said, the man who leaves work and heads for the brothel, or sits at home with his family till the children go to bed, then goes to a bar, has a few drinks, and picks up a woman on the street, and they go off in the car to some secluded place or into a motel room. The only choice in prostitution are men's choice to buy. And this we lump together with the whole patriarchal domination of women, and specifically the whole sexual exploitation of women. This is not disconnected from sexual harassment or rape or childhood sexual abuse. In fact, we know that the greater percentage of women in prostitution today and last month and last century have been sexually abused at home as children. I mean the greater percentage. I think we're talking in the percentages in the 90% range. And it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense that if a father is doing this to his daughter or a grandfather or an uncle or an older brother, and the little girl has no choice and no way to do anything with it, that she adapts, because that's how you survive this life.
Well, just to add a little bit more to that, they not only adapt, but they start making choices as this is the way you get attention, this is the way you get love, this is the way, a sense of importance, a place in the world. There's all kinds of things that go on around that. But this subject is so big that it's amazing to me, because it's a global subject. Now, one of the things that I found really interesting in the information that you sent me was this open letter that these women wrote talking about their experiences. Now, who are these women, and how did they gather? What was their motivation for doing this?
Many of the women, there's two open letters that's on our website. One of them is one that I wrote when I came back to this work after having been away for several years, saying that I've come back, I recognize not only that there's this problem with separating trafficking and not dealing with prostitution, but on the other hand, there is this tremendous hope in these wonderful women who have survived prostitution and are now telling it like it is. There's another open letter that I really would like to direct your viewers to on our website. And it's written by a woman who has been in prostitution. It's just newly published. And it's also on our Facebook page. So we have a Facebook page for Abolish Prostitution now. And she writes an open letter to the customers where she says, so you think that we loved you, you think that we cared for you, we think that you think that we were happy to do all the things that you were doing to us and requiring us or me to do. Well, I want to tell you, buddy, we despise you. We hate what you did to us. We laugh about you and ridicule you after you've left when we get together with each other and there are no other customers around. And then she enumerates the kinds of things that are being bought.
Well, there's another perspective to it too that people have to recognize, is that when you are abused or you're in an abusive situation, how you act out that it's okay, but yet later on behind the scenes you'll tell people it's not, but yet you'll come back and do it again. It's kind of interesting how that happens, and I think the reason it happens, just psychologically from my studies, is that we get into patterns, and it's hard to break these patterns.
But Elaine, that's what would happen, I think, to a child who's being sexually abused. But in prostitution, the requirement is for women to act as if they like it. I've written about this in Prostitution of Sexuality. They have to dissociate from themselves, and they do this quite consciously and intentionally because it's part of what the customer has bought, being fawned over. Well, he's doing something abusive, and she's having to act as if she loves it. It's required in the work, if you call it work. When people go around calling this sex work, that is what is required. So it's not just a pattern of behavior where they change after when they're with other people. It is what is required of them. It's how they get the money.
So it's like a job.
If you want to call that a job, I mean, but
it's like, the reason I say that, it's like, I remember that when I was going to college, I took this job. I was house cleaning. And I remember doing it and say how I would be so happy when I see the woman, but afterwards I left. God, if I had to come back again. It was very disturbing to me, but yet while I was doing it, I made it like it was okay because she was paying me money, and I didn't want to let her know that I hated house cleaning.
And you wanted her to come back. You needed the
right,
money.
Exactly.
So what we have with prostitution is something that includes all the issues that affect women. It is about women's underemployment and unemployment. It's about women's poverty. We found out a few weeks ago that 42 million women in the United States are impoverished. So it's about poverty. It's about women's migration and immigration. It is about violence against women, all forms of violence against women. It's about battery and abuse. It's about incest assault because it often begins there. It's about the misrepresentation of women in the media as kind of commodities. You go to a car show and you see women strewn around across the top of cars as a way to sell a car. Sell a car, sell a woman. So it's all those issues that affect women that are not just separate, disconnected issues. All of them come down on the heads and backs of the women in prostitution.
Well, you made some great points there. I'm telling you, I was just thinking about what you said. I mean, there's so much to this topic, and time goes by quickly when we're having fun. And I already extended this show a little bit because you're just too interesting to just say, hey, this is such a big topic. So, we're coming to the end of the show, and what I would like you to do is just look at the camera and anything that you would care to say. I mean, this is a very, very heavy, I feel it is a very, very heavy subject. And also, in ending with those thoughts about discrimination against women, it just feels that there are so many levels of discrimination how we're being used. In fact, you were talking about throwing yourself over cars. You know, actually when they sell nuclear weapons, etc., they also use women. I mean, I've seen actually advertising with a woman standing very sexy next to a bomb. I mean, and I went, what? I couldn't believe it. So women are exploited in so many ways, and I think what you're talking about is bringing forward such extreme abuse in my mind, that we have to really look at it, and we really have to continue to look at it. And as we talked and as we move forward, I see you're right. This should not be happening to women. We have to have better choices than this. We have to have better choices, because even if we made a choice to sell our bodies, just the fact that we had to repeat it time after, I just can't imagine a poor woman doing this. I mean, this is just beyond me when you start thinking about it. So just go ahead and look at the camera. Anything, any message you'd like to give, any information you'd like to send into, please be my guest.
So I want to begin with parents encouraging your daughters into having strength and self-confidence and self-awareness, preventing your sons from entering into the contempt for women that men who buy prostitution or rape women or beat women show. Urge them, show them what real respect for human beings can be. I want to go to the women on the streets and say that programs are existing all over the world now. They're not enough, and there's not many, but there are programs that you can find that will give you the support you need to get out. And if you can't find a program, find a helper, find someone who will help you and support you in getting out. I want to go to the states around the world, the different countries, and tell them to get your laws off of women's bodies and put them on men's backs. Arrest every man who even approaches a woman to buy her for prostitution. Fine him as high a fine as you can get. I know that there were some people in Oakland who were thinking that the fine should be $25,000 for those white middle-class men who come into the ghettos of Oakland to buy black teenage girls for prostitution and then go back home to their upper middle class or upper class homes. And join us in Abolish Prostitution now. This is a women's movement, but there is plenty of room for men, and we really need you men to go and get the rest of them off of women's backs. Please take this issue seriously, because women's lives and children's lives are at stake every day.
Well, Kathleen Berry, thank you so much. Thank you so much for caring, and not only caring, but sharing all your ideas and thoughts. I really appreciate it. And welcome, welcome, welcome here. And I'm glad you're feeling better and glad your health is good so you can work on some of these really important issues.
Thank you, Elaine. As always, you always make it a very, very interesting interview.
Wow, Kathleen, thank you.
We're done?
Boy, that was a lot. You know, that's what Women's Spaces is all about, is thinking about different issues. I mean, this has been, personally for me, was very, very heavy, just thinking about what women have to go through. And how, if a woman does make a choice like that what she is actually getting herself into. I think most people don't realize what it all entails. And I was really shocked to find out that there are actually lobbyists, that actually there are people that go to Washington, D.C. and lobby against making prostitution illegal, but trying to work hard to make it more and more and more states. It's just a very, very interesting topic to me. Well, you've been listening to Women's Spaces. My name is Elaine B. Holtz. I'm your host, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening and also for watching here on Public Access TV. I want to encourage my listeners and my viewers, become a member of C Media. That's how you support me and the show very important. And also a special thank you once again to Reverend Turner from the Community Baptist Church for making such a great celebration for Martin Luther King Day. And you know, the subject was heavy when we're talking about abolishing prostitution and we're talking about the sex trade and trafficking. But you know, I go back to Martin Luther King's statement when he says, "The day your life ends is when you become silent about the things that matter." And it matters to women like Kathleen Berry. It matters to me that women have equal opportunity, that women are put into positions where they can have a good life, an enjoyable life, and not be abused. I mean, when you start thinking of some of the abusive situations that women get into, when I was reading this letter from the survivors of prostitution, I was shocked, to be honest with you, because it gave me an insight that I did not have before. So there's a lot to think about, and pay attention when things come up in the paper about this important issue, particularly women. Find out ways that you can support. Find out ways that you can support other women in their travels and their experiences and their desire to have a better life for themselves. Anyway, this is Elaine Holtz with Women's Spaces saying thank you again for watching and listening, and I look forward to being with you the next time.
We'll do what you must do to comfort you and calm you down and let you rest now. The woman in your life, she can rest so easily. She knows everything you do because the woman in your life is you.